Hi, my name is Sahan Karimi, and I'm AMO's engineer working on the Frequency Performance Payments reform. This video is part of a series that AMO has produced to help stakeholders understand the FPP reform. Each video focuses on a different aspect of the new arrangements. In this recording, I'll be explaining contribution factor calculation. The information I'll be presenting is intended for a broad stakeholder audience and is an overview only. We recommend that participants should read the Frequency Contribution Factors Procedure, or FCFP, to understand more details. In the FPP process, once we've calculated raise and lower performance of each unit, we normalize them to determine its contribution factors. Each contribution factor is a value between -1 and 1, which shows the share of the FPP trading amount that the unit would receive or pay. A positive contribution factor means the unit will receive an FPP trading amount, while a negative contribution factor means that the unit will pay for it. An important point here is that the unit in a trading interval usually has multiple contribution factors, depending on the regulation FCAS requirements in that interval. But what is a regulation FCAS requirement? This map shows different regions in the National Electricity Market NEM. In this context, a regulation FCAS requirement is defined to indicate how much regulation FCAS capacity needs to be procured in each set of regions. The price and cost of regulation FCAS is determined with respect to each requirement. And we calculate the FPP trading amounts for each unit in the same way. For instance, in a trading interval, we might have one raise requirement that only includes SA, and one raise and one lower that include all mainland regions. In this scenario, a unit located in SA falls under three different regulation FCAS requirements: raise and lower mainland requirements, and one raise requirement for the SA region. Therefore, it will have three contribution factors and three FPP trading amounts, one for each requirement. In each trading interval, AMO calculates a contribution factor for a unit with respect to each regulation FCAS requirement that is related to that unit. The contribution factor of a unit is determined based on the performance of the unit as well as the performance of all other units. To do that, we simply divide the performance of the unit by the absolute sum of performance of all units in the requirement that have the same sign. In other words, if the performance is positive, we divide it by the sum of all positive performances. And if it is negative, we divide it by the absolute sum of all negative performances. Also, when we determine the contribution factors for raise regulation requirements, we use the raise performances. Similarly, we use lower performance for calculating the contribution factors of the lower requirements. To better understand the contribution factor calculation, let's go through a worked example. In the simple example, we assume there are two regions that each have two generation units. The table shows the raise and lower performances of those four units and the residual performance in each region. These are inputs to the contribution factor calculation. In this part, we want to calculate the contribution factors of a raise requirement that includes both regions. Because it is a raise requirement, we use the raise performances to calculate the contribution factors. The second step is to aggregate the performance of residual in both regions to determine the performance of residual for the requirement. We also determine the absolute sum of all positive and the absolute sum of all negative performances. And now we can calculate the contribution factors for each unit. Unit GA2 has a positive performance equal to 120. Because it is a positive performance, we normalize it by dividing it by the absolute sum of all positive performances. The 0.46 contribution factor means the unit would receive 46% of all FPPs for this requirement. On the other hand, the performance of unit GA2 is negative. So it is normalized by dividing it by the absolute sum of negative performances. This makes its contribution factor minus 0.2, which means the unit pays for 20% of FPPs for this requirement. We calculate other contribution factors in a similar way. As you can see, the sum of all contribution factors would be 0. The next requirement, however, is a lower regulation FCAS requirement that includes both regions. So we should use the lower performance of units to calculate the contribution factors of the units and residual for this requirement. As you can see, the contribution factors are completely different with the previous one. And some units that received FPPs in the previous requirement are paying for them in this one. This is because while their raise performance was helpful, their lower performance was not. Lastly, we have a raise requirement that includes only one region. Similar to the previous examples, we use the raise performances and normalize them by using the sum of positive and negative performance to determine the contribution factors. Now let's look at a visual example of contribution factor calculation over multiple intervals. This figure shows the raise and lower performance of a power station for 6 intervals, determined based on its historical data in the year 2021. Using the raise and lower performance of the unit and all other units in the system, we calculated the contribution factors of this unit for 2 raise requirements and 2 lower requirements in the 6 trading intervals. As you can see, there are intervals where lower and raise contribution factors have opposite signs. This means in those intervals, while the unit would have received an FPP trading amount in some requirements, it should have paid in some other requirements. You can find more information about the contribution factor in section 6.2 of the FCFP. I hope this information has been helpful. In the following videos, we will focus on other aspects of the FPP reform. If you require more information, please visit AIMO's FPP project page or email us at fppconsultation@aimo.com.au. Thank you.